I hope everybody's well. I'm very, very sorry to miss the symposium, Flipped System Symposium in Marrakesh. It would have been wonderful to meet all my fellow authors. I don't think we've been gathered in one place before, so I'm so sorry that Renee and I had to miss it. So I'm filling in for him as well. So my name is Jammer Evers. I'm a history teacher. Recently also became vice president of our General Education Union. Still writing, and our latest books were also Teaching the Fourth Industrial Revolution and On Education and Democracy, 25 Lessons from the Teaching Profession with Susan Hopgood and Fred van Leeuwen and some others. And I think that topic, democracy, is the thing I want to talk about. So when we originally published The Alternative, sort of like the Dutch version in 2013, there were these sort of like certain tenets that we thought would be necessary to flip the system, to empower teachers, to build a system of trust. So trust, professional honor, sense of purpose, know what education is for as a teaching profession, individual within schools, collaboration, collective autonomy, enough support and time, so that's more like the material conditions also, but also you could go outside of school, etc. And those things still stand. I think they're still extremely important. But to me, we're in a next phase, which is, I think, in world history, I would say, which is more political, I think. So it adds, and we're probably going to do a second edition on Flip the System, and that's going to be a big part of it, democracy, freedom, and definitely also power. That's a lesson for me from the last 4 or 5 years, and also why I became more active and also in the leadership of my teacher union. So why this shift? I think what we are seeing right now, and which I wasn't that sure of even when Flip the System was published, but definitely not when The Alternative was published and when we started writing it in 2012, 2013, is how much things were shifting. So after the Cold War, of course, we were in this sort of like new era at the end of history, liberalism, capitalism, which turned out to be a neoliberal ideology, so deregulation, decentralization, new public management, privatization in a lot of countries as well. And those were the things we were focusing on, I think, with Flip the System, so pushing back on those kind of things. But I think from 2008 onwards, and the huge economic crisis we had in 2008 and the resulting austerity in the West, did huge damage, I think. And in the last decade, we saw that inequality was rising in a rapid pace. Public goods are crumbling down, and you can also see that it's a decade of illiberalism. And what we are seeing now as we enter the 2020s, the roaring 20s, we see a rise of authoritarianism, influence of big tech, surveillance capitalism, and anti-enlightenment ideas, I think. So we're getting to the next stage where ideas like racism are mainstreamed again, which is extremely worrying because it impacts, of course, our lives as citizens, as teachers, and it's impacting our children in a really bad way. So you can see several trends, I think, sort of like tech and authoritarianism, which you can see in China, for example. There's huge experiments there where children and students are, and of course workers, are surveyed through different means, facial recognition, tracking devices, etc., 24 hours a day. And that supposedly is then giving you an idea that they're learning or not, which is nonsense, of course. But also huge influence also of like huge corporations pushing edtech, also influencing education which I think should be a democratic, it should be decided by the public, by us. And both those trends, I think authoritarianism combined with technology and the huge influence of capital and technology in edtech is making for a more unfree societies, but also more unfree education systems. So, and if you're talking about educational change, then you definitely need to take into account these kind of trends. And of course, especially in the global south, but also in Western countries more and more. And I'm really afraid that in the Netherlands this will be the next phase. The unbridled privatization of teachers. I've traveled a lot the last couple of years, met a lot of more commercially minded people working in education, and this is sort of like their vision. Education will be for profit. It's not efficient because public systems are not efficient. So teachers will be a luxury good, and the rest will make do with platforms, video conferencing, and the poor students won't see a teacher at all. They'll just be taught by an algorithm or something, which just isn't education at all. Of course, it's undemocratic, it's unfree, it's an unequal thing, but you can see these popping up, these ideas popping up all over the place, and I've met these people personally as well. And we're in a huge educational crisis in the Netherlands, huge teacher shortage popping up, schools closing, so we can't find any teachers anymore. We're clamoring for more investment in our public education system, and the politicians just won't do it. So the alternative will be that the shortages will grow, and that the middle class and the upper class will start to leave the public education system. That's my main worry, and people are also talking about edtech as a solution, AI as a solution, cyber teachers, etc. So politicians are already saying this. So these are scenarios that are already happening, and it's destroying our profession, and it's destroying, I think, also in the end, our democracy. And that's the other big main thing that's going on at the moment, and that's the rise of illiberalism in Hungary, in Brazil, United States. I think Brexit is a component of that. And what these people are doing, what these politicians, what these movements are doing, is attacking teachers directly, attacking academics directly, but also the press, judges. So all these institutions that make up our liberal democracies and our rule of law, those things are under attack, and we know what the alternative is. We can already see the contours of that happening in Hungary and in Turkey, for example. And truth itself is under attack. So what we're a knowledge profession. We stand for that truth, and we want to bring across that truth to our students. And now Australia is burning, and the politician who's denying climate science is in power. And that's just one example. There's so many examples where the truth is under attack, and it's well financed. And our children are under the influence of that. I can see it happening. I can see them being more influenced and poisoned by these conspiracy theories, denialists, etc. Becoming more far right, climate denial. So that as a teacher, for your profession, what you stand for, even that should be enough to take. Is declining rapidly. So for me, these three things: democracy, and I mean also as a tool for educational change. So having a say in in your work, the freedoms that have to be protected as a guiding sort of like value, but also power, the power to change those things, and that's what a lot of people don't want to talk about. What we should, because a lot of people are using that power to change and destroy our democracies. So we should do the same thing. And then historically speaking, unions have usually been at the forefront and pretty crucial. And more literature now is talking about that, to keep democracy healthy, to keep inequality down. And I think it's also that education and teacher unions are extremely important for that. So they are, I think, also now, especially in this more political day and age, the return of history, that they're a prerequisite to flip the system. So one of the examples, and there are quite a few actually, where you can see that is, and it was in Chicago in the 2010, when a group of teachers started taking over the union, and they completely changed that union and started to make it a voice for the teachers again. So a collective democratic voice. And they, of course, Chicago was pretty bad. This is an ad reform laboratory, inequality. They were demoralized, very hard to organize there. You have to have a 75% vote to strike. But they managed to do that, and the way they did it was to make the union democratic again, a voice for equality for their community. And they said, we're going to bargain for the common good, and that's also how they convinced the public. So when they went out on strike in 2012, I think it was about 98 or 99 turnout, which is, it blew my mind when I heard about that. And that was sort of like a profession standing up for their children, for their community, and for their profession. And that's sort of like became the focal point, sort of like the spin-off for the later in 2018, the huge Red for Ed strikes, where a lot of people were inspired by that. And in 2019, they did it again. They influenced Los Angeles, and I can honestly say that they influenced worldwide, at least education unions, but broader than that. We had a conference in Bangkok, our ninth Congress from Education International, and they were also talking about these things that were happening there, and you could see that people were really inspired. So for me, that was one of the keys, I think, which we should be striving for, and which also people in academia, in universities should be very aware of, and also start to organize, I think, because in higher education is in the same dire straits, I think, as K-12. So for me, unions are a collective and democratic voice, which can also organize real power. It's not a third party. It's a collective autonomy in school, so that's like the flip the system theme, and it's increasing the agency of teachers. They're starting to talk about education, also politics, but also how to organize, what kind of education they want, and what kind of schools they want, what kind of curriculum, what kind of facilities do they need. So they are they're involved way broader than just a school, and that improves education. A good union is also organized within all the schools, but also represented from all the schools. So it's a real democratic network where we have a true collective voice. And when you can see that they're also improving the conditions for students, for the community, and for teachers, which is also a prerequisite for a good education. And if we don't push back on all those kind of things, which I just said, and don't have the organizational, financial, political power to push back on those things, our students are going to be the first victims. And I think our colleagues and teachers are going to be the first victims as well. So it's also changing the political narrative and power structure. And that might be uncomfortable for a lot of people. But I think we really have to ask ourselves, where do we want to go? Who do we want to be? What kind of world do we want to live in? And what does it take from me to take responsibility for that? And that was what Flip the System was always about. So we're the ones we're waiting for. And I think for me, democracy is something very fragile, very something to cherish, something in which children can flourish, in which I have flourished, teachers can flourish, and that we have to re-engage with democracy every day again. And we have to practice that in the school. We have to have a voice in our schools, so no top-down systems and principals telling us what to do. That's also bad for democracy in a microcosm, but it has a huge effect in how we perceive our lives in our democracies. So I want to end with John Dewey. Democracy has to be born anew every generation, and education is its midwife. And that's a sort of like an assignment John Dewey is giving us, and because we are the ones who are responsible for education and also for democracy. So I would love to talk about this further. I can't right now, but I'm going to be involved in lots of different things internationally in the future as well. Also into the States, when Mike's publishing his book in July, or to me at least I'm going to be in July, and then we're going to engage with the books and also with the American unions. So give me give me a call to talk about these ideas. I'd love to talk further. And Deb and Andy, thank you for all the wonderful work that you're doing, especially you, Andy. Without you, this whole project, the whole Flip the System project, wouldn't have started at all. So you're a mentor and an example, I think, and I think you're also personifying what I'm talking about right now in this presentation. And well, all the best with the symposium, and let me know how it was. Thanks.